First Things First by Stephen Covey, A. Roger Merrill, and Rebecca R. Merrill is a time management book that asked readers to examine their most deeply held values. When people center the things in life that are most important, whatever those may be, triaging a busy schedule becomes an easy exercise instead of an ongoing nightmare. Putting first things first is a process that requires a significant time investment on the front end, but the results will be well worth the effort. Time management is a booming industry. Its schools of thought have evolved over time, but too many approaches create unrealistic expectations of maximum efficiency and enhanced productivity. Since there are only so many hours in the day, a better approach is to spend more time planning and scheduling the things in life that are most important. That way, the petty concerns of daily life will occupy less time and headspace. Too many people live by the clock. Appointments, deadlines, and other commitments dominate the average person's schedule. Instead of overemphasizing the clock, it would be better for people to attend more carefully to their personal and professional missions, values, relationships, and talents. Too often, the appointments and commitments that are on the clock don't match up with the things that are truly meaningful. That discrepancy can cause any number of bad feelings, including sadness, discomfort, and even emotional numbness. But most people never confront those bad feelings unless something dramatic, like an illness or a death, forces their hand. Most people simply don't spend their time in the right way. They feel pulled and pressed by urgent deadlines and demands, but that stress doesn't serve a purpose. The only way to conquer time management is to totally reevaluate how time is allocated over the course of the day. A happy life is not a matter of maximum efficiency. It's a matter of satisfaction and fulfillment and peace. It can be helpful to envision one's time as a matrix with 4 quadrants. Quadrant 1 contains activities that are both urgent and important, such as surgery or a big deadline. Some things in life truly are urgent and important, but others have an artificial sense of urgency. When people procrastinate, for instance, they often deal with important tasks at the last moment, which creates unnecessary stress. Quadrant 2 contains activities that are important, but not urgent. Most people avoid spending time in Quadrant 2 because it requires long-term planning and problem solving. But it's truly the golden zone, the ideal place to spend most hours of the day, because it is more peaceful than the heated zone of Quadrant 1, which should be reserved for tasks that are truly time-sensitive. Quadrant 3 holds activities that are urgent, but not important. Many people spend a lot of time here because Quadrant 3 consists largely of the noise of daily life, phone calls, meetings, and generally fulfilling other people's expectations. Quadrant 4 is basically a wasteland where people go when they do things that are neither useful nor important. Traditional time management approaches undervalue interpersonal relationships, which are vital to a well-lived life. Everything and everyone is interconnected, and it's important to nurture those relationships. The Western world places a premium on individual achievement and often inspires a competitive mindset, but working with others and building a cooperative culture at work and at home should always be the goal. Sometimes the demands of daily life obscure the things that are truly important. Everyone has an internal voice telling them how to live their best life, but it's easy to ignore it. The key to time management is to tune out distractions and focus only on what that inner voice has to say. It is always a reliable guide. Key insights. 1. Traditional approaches to time management are fundamentally flawed. 2. Too often, people's schedules are driven by urgent demands on their time rather than things that are truly important. 3. Some people are addicted to stress, which decreases their quality of life. 4. Willpower can be strengthened over time, which makes goals easier to reach. 5. Effective people know how to insert a pause between stimulus and response. 6. Good leaders strive to serve and connect with others. 7. Powerful mission statements are flexible enough to accommodate changing circumstances. 8. Cooperation is more fruitful than competition. Analysis. Key Insight 1. Traditional approaches to time management are fundamentally flawed. First Things First is a 4th-generation approach to time management in that it centers the activities that are most important. The 3 generations that came before it were each useful in their own way, if ultimately flawed. The first generation was based on simple list-making tools. Second-generation time management added schedules and calendars to track appointments and other commitments. Generation 3 added goal setting, which prioritized activities that contributed to long and short-term goals. Fourth-generation planning is about questioning assumptions, truly scrutinizing each and every task to make sure it belongs on the schedule. To better understand the differences across these time management strategies, consider the planning needs of a fictional business school student, Tanya. Her first-generation approach to time management was making simple lists where no one item was weighted more heavily than another. But that method made it hard to see, at a glance, when and where certain activities would take place. Tanya added a second-generation tool, a calendar app, on her phone to help keep track of deadlines, classes, and appointments. But as she was finishing her degree and preparing to apply for a grant and launch a new business, she found the calendar wasn't sophisticated enough. She replaced the calendar app with a paper planner that had more sophisticated features, including daily pages for notes, appointments, and reflective journaling, at-a-glance spreads for weekly, monthly, and annual overviews, and other planning tools. This third-generation time management approach worked well, until Tanya had her first child. At that point, Tanya learned to scrutinize and reevaluate everything before it went on the schedule, so she could find more time to spend with the baby. She decided that some tasks could be dropped, and others could be delegated. She still used her paper planner, but she was much more discerning about which parts of her work were critical and which tasks could be safely set aside until she was ready to spend more time in the office. Key Insight 2. Too often, people's schedules are driven by urgent demands on their time rather than things that are truly important. The distinction between urgent activities and important activities is subtle, but significant. Urgent activities are time-sensitive, but they're not necessarily important. Too often, people relinquish huge chunks of their daily schedules to activities that are urgent, surrendering their precious time to the whims of other people's phone calls or last-minute requests. Meanwhile, an important activity, such as scheduling an interview for an unfilled position, may get put on the back burner because it doesn't seem as pressing. Writing for Harvard Business Review, Amy Boyce offers the example of setting up a password manager for her online accounts, an important activity she avoided for a long time. To help encourage herself to get the task done, Boyce set aside a full workday to finish it. She points out that unfamiliar or one-off tasks like setting up a new service are clumsy processes that are unpredictable, so setting aside an abundance of time can help ease anxiety. Another strategy she tried was settling on incremental progress. Instead of aiming to incorporate all of her online accounts into the password manager, she identified her most important logins and started with those. Anyone who allocates more time to important tasks must allocate less time to unimportant tasks, assuming hours are not being added to the workday. Boyce points out that pressing but not critical tasks, like answering email, can be batched together and taken care of in bulk during specified times of day. She also recommends investing time in setting up systems that will save time in the future, such as preparing templates for frequently used documents or automating orders for certain work supplies. She warns against spending too much time contemplating unimportant decisions, providing overly detailed feedback, or getting inadvertently absorbed by activities like posting on social media platforms. Key Insight 3. Some people are addicted to stress, which decreases their quality of life. A moderate amount of stress can increase focus and produce results in the face of a truly urgent deadline, for instance. The reason that stress can provide these benefits is because it creates a sort of natural high by activating certain pathways in the central nervous system. Addictive drugs affect the nervous system in a similar way. Those who are most vulnerable to a stress addiction include highly competitive people or people who are prone to mental health issues like anxiety and depression. Once a person becomes overly stressed on a long-term basis, all the benefits of acute stress fade away. So-called stress junkies have brains that are flooded with cortisol, a hormone that can shorten attention span, disrupt sleep, and cause other concentration problems. Stress junkies remain addicted to the physical sensation of stress, but they need more cortisol to feel it, which exacerbates all those negative long-term effects. Researchers have found that stress affects more than just cognitive function. It is also a holistic health issue. People who are chronically stressed have suppressed immune systems, which means they're more prone to everything from heart disease to seasonal allergies. Contagious diseases like the flu become more difficult for the body to fight off. Stress is often a self-perpetuating behavior too, because the body becomes less sensitive to the bursts of stress-induced cortisol as time wears on. That means that stress addicts seek out more stressful situations to experience the natural cortisol high. Key Insight 4. Willpower can be strengthened over time, which makes goals easier to reach. Everyone has a personal integrity account that can help build willpower over time. A metaphorical deposit into that account is made anytime a person honors a commitment or reaches a goal. Conversely, a withdrawal is made when a commitment is broken or a goal is disregarded. People who don't have much trust in themselves can make these metaphorical deposits over time by keeping small promises to themselves, building up integrity until they're ready to tackle major change. Since it can take time to rally willpower, a short-term solution in some situations is to erase the need for integrity whenever possible. In other words, sometimes it's possible to just remove temptation instead of drawing upon reserves of willpower to make the right choice. A woman who wants to use her mobile phone less, for instance, might leave it at home when she goes out for dinner with her family, thus removing the temptation to pull it out to check email during dessert. Or she might leave the phone in the living room when she goes to bed, so that she doesn't stay up late sending messages on Facebook. If she uses Twitter too much, she might delete the app from her phone. Another method for bypassing the need for willpower is to adjust default settings. Automating part of a process removes at least one barrier to its completion. A person who wants to start saving money in a new account can decide to automate a weekly withdrawal instead of depositing the money manually, for instance. Key Insight 5. Effective people know how to insert a pause between stimulus and response. There's a space between action and reaction, and learning to access that space can make one's choices more thoughtful and deliberate. This pause can be conceptualized as the beat between a stimulus and a response. If one child calls another child a name, the stimulus of the insult might make the second child respond by crying. The child simply doesn't have the emotional toolbox to brush off the insult. But if the same situation were to happen between two adults, say during a heated business meeting, the insulted adult is more likely to regulate emotions so that the response is more controlled. Instead of crying or screaming an insult in return, perhaps the adult chooses to take a deep breath and proceed calmly. In 10% Happier, television journalist Dan Harris discusses how meditation teaches people to respond as opposed to react. A reaction is involuntary, whereas a response is considered. Meditation can help people develop their capacity to respond, which isn't inborn or natural. Harris cites researchers who found that regular meditation shrank parts of the brain and made other parts grow larger. The regions that shrank were what is colloquially known as the lizard brain, the brain matter that houses people's base instincts. The regions that grew were in the prefrontal cortex, which is relatively new in terms of human evolution. These areas of the brain help control urges and instincts. In another study examining part of the brain called the default mode network, researchers learned that people who meditate deactivate the part of the brain that worries about the future and the past. The act of meditating rewired the brain's default thought patterns. Key Insight 6. Good leaders strive to serve and connect with others. Leaders should never issue edicts or rule from the top down. Instead, they should strive to serve and empower their employees, taking the time to get to know people and listening to their points of view. In Leaders Eat Last, leadership guru Simon Sinek, who was heavily influenced by Stephen Covey's work, shows disdain for leadership styles that prioritize profits over people. As a model for the servant leader, Sinek points to the U.S. Marine Corps, where the highest-ranking officials eat meals after their lowest-ranked subordinates. Soldiers and employees who feel supported by their leaders tend to perform better, feel more satisfied at work, and experience less stress. Employees working under unsupportive or disinterested leaders tend to feel more alienated and less motivated overall. Research suggests that a sense of autonomy is very important to the modern employee. As an example, Sinek describes the transformation of a company that treated its administrative workers differently than its factory workers, even though both sides of the operation work for the same employer in the same building. The office workers enjoyed much more autonomy than the factory workers, who were in a highly controlled setting. Factory workers used time clocks, had rigidly scheduled breaks, and had to retrieve spare parts from a locked cage. The cage in particular had a highly negative symbolic value, making the factory workers feel as though leadership regarded them with deep suspicion. In sharp contrast, office workers had open schedules and free access to the supplies they needed. When a new leader at the company learned of the disparity, factory workers were granted the same privileges as their office working counterparts. Productivity soared, expenses dropped, and the factory workers felt more satisfied in their jobs. Key Insight 7. Powerful mission statements are flexible enough to accommodate changing circumstances. A mission statement is neither an item on a to-do list nor a long-term goal. It is a broad statement of purpose. Mission statements should be conceptualized as living documents, rather than edicts that are set in stone. In Start With Why, Simon Sinek describes a company's mission, or a personal mission, as a golden circle with 3 rings. The outer ring describes what the company or person does. Apple, for instance, makes iPhones and other electronics. The middle ring of the golden circle is the how, which is usually a matter of how a company is different or better than its competitors. At Apple, the how is the beauty and simplicity that differentiate its products. The innermost ring is the why, which is a company's or individual's core beliefs, why they go to work. Apple is an industry leader, not because it makes iPhones or because its iPhones are user-friendly, but because the company's philosophy is to innovate and challenge the status quo. Cannily, Apple's marketing campaigns tend to emphasize the why. In the 1990s, for instance, the company's motto was "Think Different." While that motto is no longer in use, it has remained relevant across the company's product lines. Think Different applies just as readily to Apple's approach to mobile phones and tablets as it did to the company's computers and laptops. The power of articulating a company or personal mission in terms of why, as opposed to how or what, is that core values stay the same even if the product or the way in which it is produced shifts. One's job title might change, or the company one works for might change, but one's core values should be stable no matter the context. Key Insight 8. Cooperation is more fruitful than competition. Too often, people approach their work as a zero-sum game. Instead of competing with one another, employees should work together to fulfill mutually beneficial goals. Harvard Business School professor Amy Edmondson suggests that elite professionals in the business world often come to their jobs by rising to the top of a series of extremely competitive processes. After all those years of fostering a competitive mindset, teamwork might not come naturally or easily. Therefore, leaders must explicitly encourage employees to cast off their unhealthy competitive tendencies and cooperate for the greater good. One tactic is to celebrate and reward successful teams, as opposed to outstanding individuals. Anything a leader can do to tie the fates of the individual team members together can help. For instance, the leader might create a reward scheme in which everyone, or no one, on the team receives a bonus at the end of a project. If they are forced to share the same fate, employees will naturally feel more invested in one another's work. Leaders must be careful not to craft projects or work environments that are inadvertently competitive. Some situations are inherently adversarial, even if there's no explicit competition. For example, a team staffed with professionals in similar roles, from similar backgrounds, performing similar tasks, will naturally lead to an environment in which team members compare their individual performance to everyone else's. A sense of conflict builds, perhaps inadvertently or even unconsciously. An alternative strategy would be to build more diverse teams, where roles and duties don't compare so easily. Teammates will be more likely to look to one another as colleagues instead of competitors, which is good for the bottom line in any business. Important people. Stephen Covey, 1932 to 2012, the main author, was the founder of the Franklin Covey Company. He wrote the bestseller The 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. A. Roger Merrill, a coach and consultant, and his wife, Rebecca R. Merrill, are the second and third authors. Author style. First Things First is a hybrid of the business and self-help genres. It's geared towards busy, high-powered professionals, but the authors give ample space and thought to the life side of the work-life balance. The text is divided into 4 main parts. The first section identifies the pain point in most people's schedules as dedicating too much time to unimportant things. It establishes the book's central metaphor of the clock and the compass, with the clock representing a person's chronological schedule and the compass representing mission and values. The second section focuses on the quadrant organizing system. Sometimes the authors use proprietary language for ideas that don't really require it, as with the phrase circle of influence. This Franklin Covey branding strategy isn't particularly useful for readers, especially if they haven't read Covey's other books. First Things First elaborates on many of the concepts in the 7 Habits of Highly Successful People, and the 2 books may be considered companions. The third and fourth sections of First Things First, which focus on building strong interpersonal relationships and offer examples that illustrate some of the book's main principles, respectively, are quite short. The book has no appendix, which is a missed opportunity for supplementary materials that could have made the text interactive. Throughout the text, placards with stylized fonts summarize main points. The tone of the book is mostly conversational, with many of its metaphors drawing from the natural world. Author's perspectives. First Things First was authored by 3 people, and the bulk of the text uses the first person we to convey their perspective as a trio. Occasionally, the voices of the authors, Stephen Covey, A. Roger Merrill, and Rebecca R. Merrill, are differentiated in anecdotes that are labeled with their first names. First-person accounts from people who were presumably their clients are also included. This format, with its hodgepodge of voices, is a little odd since the authors and their relationships to one another are never introduced in any way. Contextual clues suggest the Merrills are a married couple. Stephen Covey is the most famous of the 3 authors, having popularized self-help literature geared toward a business audience with the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. He was a sought-after consultant who held a doctorate in religious education from Brigham Young University, where he studied American success literature. While he was still a graduate student, he led self-help groups on campus. Later, he established Franklin Covey Company, which still sells leadership and organization services and tools. Covey's extensive experience in the field comes through in First Things First, which frequently reflects on the fields of self-help and time management. Franklin Covey, at its peak, consulted with some 2/3 of all Fortune 500 companies. Covey was named one of Time magazine's most influential people in 1996. A. Roger Merrill is an executive coach and consultant at Franklin Covey. His background is in business management. Whether or not Rebecca Merrill works or has worked at Franklin Covey is unclear, though she has authored many books with her husband.